My name is Ethan Walker, and until a few years ago, I was just another face in the sea of cubicles at Callahan and Myers, a mid-sized software development firm tucked away in a nondescript office park outside of Dallas, Texas. The kind of place you drove past every day without sparing a glance. The building was all tinted glass, brown brick, and that stale smell of industrial carpet that clung to your clothes no matter how quickly you try to slip out at the end of the day. I worked there for nearly 7 years, starting as an entry-level project assistant right out of college. Most mornings, I'd pull into the cracked parking lot 10 minutes early, park in the same far-off corner, row G, space 214, and sip cheap gas station coffee in my battered Civic while trying to gather the mental energy to walk through those glass doors. Inside, everything was predictable. The same corporate posters about synergy and customer success hung askew on the walls, the same buzzing fluorescent lights overhead, and the same people who never really saw me, not as anything more than a useful cog. My cubicle was wedged between the break room and the printer, a high-traffic zone, which meant I had to endure a constant barrage of chatter and eye rolls directed at me whenever I dared to suggest an idea in meetings. I'd tried in the beginning to be friendly, to bring donuts on Fridays or share articles about new coding practices, but people like Shannon, Mike, and Jared, the self-appointed core team, always found something to mock. "Ethan, you got that memo?" Mike would say, leaning over my partition with that smirk that made my stomach clench. "Oh, right. You probably can't keep up with the rest of us. You need a special color-coded system or something." Then Jared would pipe in, laughing like it was the wittiest thing he'd ever heard. Come on, man, he's still learning the ropes. 7 years later. It was always the same script. Some days, I thought maybe I was overreacting, that I should just ignore it and focus on the work itself. But it wasn't just the teasing. It was the way they made sure I never got invited to team lunches. The way my ideas were rephrased by someone else, and only then considered valuable. The way my supervisor, Carla, would look at me with this thin-lipped impatience, as if she wished she could replace me with someone flashier, more confident, less forgettable. I didn't grow up with much. My mom had worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on after my dad walked out. I learned early to keep my head down, not cause trouble, not ask for more than I was given. That instinct stuck with me even as an adult, even when I knew it was killing my spirit. Still, I cared about my work. I liked the quiet satisfaction of solving a coding problem that had stumped the team for days, or organizing workflows so projects ran more smoothly. I was good at it, even if no one seemed to notice. My life outside the office wasn't much more exciting. I lived alone in a modest apartment near White Rock Lake, with secondhand furniture and a creaky HVAC system that rattled whenever the Texas heat got too intense. My evenings were mostly spent in front of my laptop, working on freelance coding gigs to cover medical bills for my mom, who had recently been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. Sometimes, in those small hours past midnight, I'd let myself imagine what it would be like to be respected, to have a voice that carried weight, to walk into a room and watch people straighten up, pay attention. But that always felt like a fantasy reserved for someone bolder, richer, more charismatic. There was one person who didn't treat me like I was invisible. Natalie Grant, one of the HR specialists, would sometimes linger by my cubicle just to chat. She'd ask how my mother was doing or recommend a new thriller novel. She had this way of making you feel like you mattered, even when the rest of the world couldn't be bothered. "Don't let them get to you," she told me once, her voice low so no one else would hear. Some people have nothing better to do than tear down the quiet ones. I wanted to believe her, but every time I tried to stand up for myself, the words got stuck in my throat. It was during one of those late nights alone in the office that something happened, something that should have registered as unusual, but at the time, I was too tired to think much of it. I was finishing a set of deliverables for a client presentation when I heard voices drifting from Carla's office. The door was cracked just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her talking to a tall man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Their conversation was hushed, but I caught a few words. "Valuation is lower than expected. Could be an opportunity to acquire before the end of the quarter. Nobody here needs to know yet." My pulse jumped. Acquire? As in buy the company? Or maybe merge with someone else? I knew I should have walked away, but I stayed frozen behind the cubicle wall, listening. "We'll keep it under wraps," Carla said. "If word gets out, morale will tank, and you know how skittish the team is." The man in the gray suit chuckled. "You're sure none of your people suspect anything?" "Trust me," Carla replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "They're too small-minded to see the writing on the wall." I couldn't move. My brain tried to process what I'd heard, something about an acquisition, something about nobody knowing. I told myself it probably didn't matter. It probably wouldn't affect me at all. But a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered that I'd just glimpsed the fault line under everything I'd taken for granted. I went home that night replaying the conversation over and over, trying to convince myself it wasn't significant, that nothing would change. But deep down, I felt it. Something had shifted. The next morning, the usual routine felt different. The stale coffee tasted even more bitter. The chatter around me seemed forced, brittle, like everyone was acting out a script none of us believed anymore. And as I sat at my desk, pretending to review project timelines, I felt that first tiny flicker of curiosity. Maybe even hope. What if this was my chance to change something? What if I didn't have to be the invisible man anymore? I didn't know it yet, but in that moment, the life I'd known, predictable, humiliating, small, had already begun to unravel. I just hadn't realized the unraveling would lead me to a place I never dared imagine. I'll make sure to meet the word count carefully and let you know exactly when this section ends. I spent the next few days trying to pretend everything was normal. It wasn't as if I had any power to change whatever secret deal was happening behind closed doors. Besides, in a place like Callahan and Myers, a million rumors flew around every quarter. Most turned out to be nothing. But the more I thought about the words I'd overheard, "valuation is lower than expected," the harder it became to shake the feeling that this was different. I couldn't forget the look on Carla's face, that cool satisfaction like she was holding all the cards and the rest of us were just extras in her private drama. One evening, as I was leaving late again, I passed Natalie by the elevators. She looked up from her phone, frowning. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I lied automatically. "Just tired." She held the elevator door, searching my face. "You've looked worried lately." "It's nothing," I said, but something in me broke a little. I stepped into the elevator and blurted out, "You ever think they'd just sell this place out from under us?" She blinked, surprised. "Sell? What makes you say that?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect her from my suspicions, but part of me was tired of being the only one who knew. I heard Carla talking to someone. They were discussing a buyout or something. They said no one here needed to know. Natalie's expression turned serious. She glanced over her shoulder as the doors closed. "I haven't heard anything official," she said, lowering her voice. "But there have been signs. The last quarterly numbers were terrible, and Carla's been in meetings with legal every other day." My pulse picked up. "So, you think it's true?" "I think," she said carefully, "you might want to prepare yourself. If something big is happening, we're the last people who'll be told." When the elevator reached the lobby, I stepped out, feeling like the floor was tilting beneath me. For so long, I'd accepted that I had no control over anything that happened here, that I'd just survive as long as I could, then get replaced by someone younger, louder, more connected. But this was different. If the company was about to change hands, everything was up for grabs, including the power dynamics I'd lived under for years. The next day, I started paying attention in a new way. I watched Carla and the managers more closely. I read every interoffice memo with a fine-tooth comb. And then I saw it, a line in an internal report buried in the server. Potential restructuring scenarios, Phase 1. Management buyout proposals due by September 30th. My throat went dry. Today was August 2nd. That meant less than 60 days until everything I'd known could be torn apart. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the glow of the screen as if it could explain how an underpaid, overlooked project assistant could possibly have any influence over a multi-million-dollar company's fate. But somewhere in the middle of that long night, an idea began to take shape. I started researching everything I could about management buyouts, private equity firms, and valuation processes. I learned that sometimes companies in distress sold at surprisingly low prices, especially if leadership was desperate to cash out before quarterly losses became public. It was absurd, impossible. Yet as the hours passed, the idea took hold. What if I could find a way to get in on this deal? Even a small stake, some leverage to stop the people who'd spent years making me feel worthless? By sunrise, I knew I couldn't pretend this was none of my business. The following Monday, I arrived at work early, my heart hammering. I waited by the side entrance, knowing that Carla usually arrived before 7. When she finally pulled up, she was on her phone, her face pinched with irritation. I hung back in the corridor until she stepped into her office. Then, on impulse, I walked past the door, pretending to look for a misplaced binder. Through the narrow glass pane, I saw her pulling out a thick folder labeled Confidential, Acquisition Timeline. I turned away, pulse racing. When she left for a meeting 20 minutes later, I slipped into the empty office. My hands shook as I flipped open the folder, scanning the contents as fast as I could. I saw names of potential buyers, most of them firms I didn't recognize. But at the bottom of the list, a local private investor's name jumped out at me. Thomas Ellsworth. It was a name I'd heard once before. Back in college, one of my professors had worked on a startup that Ellsworth bought for pennies on the dollar, then flipped for millions. He was known for buying distressed companies and reorganizing them, sometimes in ways that left employees jobless. I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't let that happen to the people here, even the ones who'd mocked me. And if I was honest with myself, part of me wanted to show them that I wasn't some insignificant nobody. That night, I called in a favor. My friend Ben, who'd done some work in corporate law, agreed to meet me at a diner near downtown. Over greasy burgers and black coffee, I told him everything. He listened in silence, occasionally scribbling notes on a napkin. When I finished, he looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "You really want to get involved in this?" he asked. "I don't know what else to do," I admitted. "If Ellsworth buys Callahan and Myers, everyone here is screwed." And I hesitated. I'm tired of being walked over. Ben studied me for a long moment. "I can make some calls. Maybe find out if Ellsworth has already made an offer. But Ethan, this is way bigger than you realize. You could lose everything." I nodded. I already feel like I have nothing to lose. The next 2 weeks blurred into a frenzy of late-night research and clandestine phone calls. Ben confirmed that Ellsworth's firm had expressed strong interest and was preparing a preliminary bid. Every day at work, I felt the weight of the secret pressing on my chest. I'd watch Carla breeze through the halls like a queen, while the rest of us struggled to meet impossible deadlines. The tension in the office grew thicker by the day. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't know why. People whispered in corners. Rumors spread that layoffs were coming. One afternoon, as I was organizing a stack of expense reports, Shannon stopped by my cubicle, her lips curled in a smug smile.
"Did you hear?" she said.
"Apparently big changes are coming. Maybe you should start polishing that resume." I looked up at her, something inside me stealing. For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of shame. I felt a kind of cold clarity. "Thanks for the advice," I said. My voice was steady. That night, I took the biggest risk of my life. I used what little savings I had plus a line of credit to make a preliminary inquiry with an investment group Ben had connected me to, people who specialized in helping employer-led buyouts. When I wired the funds for the consultation fee, my hands were trembling. I knew there was no going back. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like I was finally stepping into the arena. And though I didn't know it yet, my coworkers' laughter would soon turn into something else entirely. Something like fear. I'll keep to the word count precisely and confirm clearly when this section ends. The morning after I sent the wire transfer, I woke up feeling like I'd crossed a border I could never return from. My apartment was still the same. Uneven blinds leaking sunrise, the cheap kitchen counter-cluttered with cereal boxes, but I felt different. My chest was tight with fear and something else. Purpose. At work, no one suspected a thing. Shannon was too busy gossiping with Jared, and Carla hardly looked my way except to snap about a spreadsheet she wanted updated. But under my bland expression, my mind was on fire. I had a call scheduled that afternoon with Michael Rios, a senior partner at the investment group Ben had referred me to. I'd spent the weekend researching everything I could about his firm, Horizon Equity Solutions. They specialized in helping employees buy out floundering companies, sometimes outright, sometimes by acquiring enough shares to force new leadership. By noon, my palms were sweating. When the conference room finally emptied, I locked the door, set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and dialed Michael's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice brisk. "Mr. Walker, good to speak with you." Ben filled me in on the basics. "Tell me what you're hoping to accomplish." I took a breath. "I want to explore options to buy a controlling interest in Callahan and Myers before it's acquired by Thomas Ellsworth." There was a short pause. "You realize that's an extremely ambitious goal?" "I do. And that you'll be personally assuming significant financial risk?" "Yes." Another silence. Most people in your position would simply look for a new job. I let out a shaky breath. Most people haven't spent 7 years being treated like they don't exist. If Ellsworth gets this place, a lot of good people will be out of work. And frankly, I'm tired of watching everything happen from the sidelines. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then his tone softened slightly. "All right, let's talk about what that would take." We spent the next hour mapping out a plan. I'd need to assemble a consortium, other employees, perhaps sympathetic investors willing to back a management buyout. I'd need to get access to internal financials, present a credible purchase proposal to Carla and the board, and secure commitments before Ellsworth's offer progressed too far. By the time I hung up, my head was spinning. I knew I couldn't do this alone. That evening, I drove to Natalie's apartment. She lived in a modest townhouse on a quiet street shaded by old oaks. I hadn't planned exactly what I'd say, but when she opened the door and saw my face, she stepped aside without a word. We sat in her kitchen, the hum of her dishwasher filling the spaces between my sentences as I told her everything, what I'd heard, what I'd done, what I was planning. When I finally finished, she rubbed her temples, exhaling slowly. "Ethan, this is huge. Do you have any idea what happens if this goes sideways?" "I lose everything." "And you're still doing it?" I looked down at my hands. "I can't keep living like this. I can't keep letting them decide my worth." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "What do you need from me?" Her question surprised me. I was hoping you might help me talk to people. Get them on board." Natalie stood, walked to her pantry, and pulled down a bottle of whiskey. She poured us each a glass. "All right," she said. "Let's burn it all down." The next week was a blur of clandestine conversations. We met after hours in the conference room, careful to wipe the whiteboards clean and delete every email trail. At first, only a handful of colleagues agreed to hear us out. David Kim from IT, Melissa Ortega from marketing, and Anika Patel, one of the senior developers. I expected skepticism, and I got plenty. "Ethan, no offense," David said, leaning back in his chair, "but you're not exactly management material." Melissa winced. "What he means is, this is a massive undertaking. Why would the board even listen to us?" I swallowed. "Because if Ellsworth comes in, they'll gut this place. Everyone knows it. But if we offer a serious alternative, a plan to buy controlling shares and keep operations local, they might take it." Anika studied me quietly, her dark eyes sharp. "Do you really think you can pull this off?" I hesitated. "I don't know, but I'm going to try." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Natalie said, "If any of you have ever complained about this place, this is your chance to do something about it." Eventually, they agreed to help. Our plan took shape piece by piece. Melissa would discreetly gather data on the company's marketing assets and client contracts. David would help me access historical financials to build a valuation model. Anika had contacts in the local business community who might be willing to invest. Every day, I felt the stakes rising. One morning, as I was reviewing numbers with David, Jared sauntered past my cubicle, eyebrows raised. "Wow, Walker," he said. "Working overtime? That's cute." Think Carla's going to finally notice you. I didn't answer. I didn't even look up. And something about my calm must have unsettled him, because he hovered there a moment longer, then walked away, frowning. At night, I lay awake replaying every contingency. If we failed, I'd be ruined, financially, professionally, personally. My mom's care depended on my income. My savings were already stretched to the edge. But every time I considered backing out, I remembered Carla's voice. They're too small-minded to see the writing on the wall. I refused to let that be my story. By late August, we had the beginnings of a proposal. Horizon Equity had agreed to conditionally back us, provided we could raise at least 20% of the buyout amount ourselves. That meant convincing dozens of colleagues to invest their savings, or securing outside partners willing to believe in me, the nobody project assistant who'd never even led a team. Natalie and I worked late every night. She brought pizza and coffee, and we'd sit cross-legged on the conference room floor, sketching numbers and strategizing. Sometimes, when exhaustion threatened to crush me, she'd touch my arm and say, "Look how far you've already come." One night, I let myself imagine it, the moment I'd sign the papers and take ownership. The faces of Shannon and Jared when they realized the person they'd ridiculed was now their boss. I tried not to linger on that fantasy too long, but it was impossible not to savor it. Then, one evening, Melissa rushed in with her laptop. "You guys need to see this," she panted. On the screen was an internal memo Carla had accidentally forwarded to a regional manager. It detailed the final negotiation schedule with Ellsworth's firm. They were planning to announce the acquisition in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I felt the blood drain from my face. Natalie looked at me, her expression grim. "We're running out of time." I forced myself to stand. "Then we move faster." The next morning, I skipped my usual commute and drove straight to Horizon Equity's downtown office. Michael met me in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed your preliminary materials," he said as we sat across from each other in a glass-walled conference room. "You have a compelling story, and your financials are tighter than I expected." I held my breath. But you're still short on committed investors." I swallowed. "If I can get the employee buy-in, will you proceed?" He leaned back, folding his arms. "If you can bring me proof of commitments covering your 20% stake, yes." I left the building with my heart hammering. 3 weeks. That was all the time I had to change everything. That night, I called a meeting with every department head who'd ever complained to me about Carla's leadership. Some of them came out of curiosity, others out of desperation. I stood at the front of the darkened conference room, my hands trembling as I laid out the plan. "We have a chance to protect our jobs, our community, and this company's legacy," I said. "But it's not going to happen unless we do it ourselves." Someone scoffed in the back. "Why you, Ethan? Why should we trust you?" I looked around the room. "Because I'm the only one willing to try." Silence. Then Anika spoke. "You have my investment." Natalie stood. "Mine too." One by one, hands went up. In that moment, the fear receded. For the first time in my life, I felt like a leader. But as everyone filed out, and the room fell quiet, I knew this was only the beginning. Because in 3 weeks, I'd either own the company that had treated me like nothing, or I'd lose everything I had left. And there was no turning back. I'll keep this section precise and inform you clearly when it ends. The final week before the board meeting was a blur of adrenaline and fear. Every hour felt like a balancing act between hope and dread. Each day, Natalie and I met in the old conference room, what we'd started calling the war room. She taped printouts of signed investment pledges to the walls like trophies. By Thursday night, we were 85% of the way to the threshold Horizon Equity required. But with only 3 business days left, the last commitments were the hardest. Some employees had gotten cold feet. Others worried about risking their savings, especially with rumors swirling that Ellsworth would announce layoffs immediately after acquisition. By Friday morning, I felt like the walls were closing in. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. My phone buzzed so constantly it felt like a second heartbeat. That afternoon, Michael Rios called to check our progress. If you don't have the full commitments by Monday at 5 o'clock, Ethan, our offer won't stand, he said gently. I need you to be clear-eyed about that. I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. We're going to get it done. When I hung up, Natalie walked over, her expression tense. You can't keep running on fumes. I don't have a choice, I said. She hesitated, then handed me a small folded paper. This is my personal investment commitment. It'll put us over the line. I stared at the amount. It was more than I could have imagined she'd risk. I can't take this, I whispered. You can and you will, she said, voice firm. This is what we've been fighting for. I swallowed hard. Thank you. We were so close. Monday morning arrived with an oppressive heat. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for a moment, watching the mirrored windows of the building glint in the sun. Today would decide everything. I walked into the office with my head high. For once, I didn't shrink when I passed Shannon or Jared. Their whispers followed me, but I didn't care. By lunchtime, all the final pledges were in hand. I called Michael and read the figures aloud. He listened silently. When I finished, he cleared his throat. All right, Ethan. I'll see you at the board meeting. At 4 o'clock sharp, I stepped into the executive conference room. Carla was already seated at the head of the polished mahogany table. Her expression was as cold as I'd ever seen it. Next to her sat a tall man in a charcoal suit, Thomas Ellsworth himself. He looked me over with mild curiosity, as if he couldn't quite figure out why I was there. The board members filed in one by one. Most barely glanced my way. To them, I was still the project assistant who fetched printouts and updated task lists. When everyone was seated, Carla clasped her hands. Let's begin. Ellsworth spoke first, laying out his acquisition offer in crisp, confident tones. He made it sound inevitable, like he was doing everyone a favor by swooping in to rescue a failing company. When he finished, Carla turned to the board. I believe this is the best path forward. The terms are generous, and Mr. Ellsworth's firm has the experience to manage the transition. No one looked at me. For a moment, I almost stayed silent, almost let them decide my fate for me, as they always had. But then I remembered Natalie's hand on my arm, the late nights in the war room, every colleague who'd trusted me with their hopes and their savings. I stood. I have an alternative proposal, I said, my voice carrying across the table. Carla's head snapped up. Excuse me? I met her gaze. On behalf of a consortium of employees and Horizon Equity Solutions, I'm submitting a buyout offer that preserves current operations and safeguards existing jobs. The silence was so complete I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Ellsworth studied me, expression unreadable. And you are? My name is Ethan Walker, I said. Project Management. One of the board members, a wiry man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. You can't be serious. I laid the packet of documents on the table. All the commitments are signed. All the funding is secured. Carla's face was pale. You think you can outbid Mr. Ellsworth? No, I said evenly. I know we can. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ellsworth leaned back, studying me with new interest. I'll admit, I didn't see this coming. His tone was calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe even respect. One of the board members lifted the packet, flipping through the numbers. His eyebrows rose. These figures, they're legitimate, he murmured. Carla's composure cracked. This is absurd. He's a junior employee. I'm the employee who built the process infrastructure you've relied on for the last 5 years, I said, my voice steady. I'm the one who managed the crisis projects that saved our largest clients. You never noticed because you didn't care. But that doesn't mean I wasn't here. The board fell into a tense murmur. Ellsworth tapped his pen on the table. With all due respect, Miss Kane, he said to Carla, if Mr. Walker's bid is higher, you can't dismiss it simply because you underestimated him. Carla looked like she wanted to spit nails. I turned to the board. You can sell to Mr. Ellsworth and watch this company get stripped for parts. Or you can let the people who built it protect it. For a moment, no one moved. Then the chairman cleared his throat. We'll adjourn to review both proposals. Please wait outside. I stepped into the hall, my heart hammering. Natalie joined me, her hand warm on my back. You did it, she whispered.
Not yet, I said.
30 minutes crawled by. I thought I might pass out from sheer adrenaline. Finally, the doors opened. The chairman beckoned me inside. Everyone looked up as I walked back to the table. The board has reviewed both offers, he said. Mr. Walker, we accept your proposal. I couldn't move. For a second, I wondered if I'd misheard. Carla's face went slack. Ellsworth exhaled slowly, then extended his hand. Congratulations, he said. You earned this. I shook it numbly. As the meeting adjourned, Carla stood rigid, her eyes glassy with fury. She didn't say a word as I passed. Outside, Natalie was waiting. She looked at my face, searching for an answer. I swallowed, my voice hoarse. It's done. She smiled and pulled me into a hug. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. I'll ensure the word count is precise and inform you clearly when this final section is complete. The day after the board accepted our proposal, I woke before dawn, too wired to sleep. For the first time in years, I didn't dread going to the office. Instead, I dressed slowly, letting the moment sink in. Today, I would walk into Callahan and Myers as the new owner. When I pulled into the parking lot, the sun was just cresting over the low rooftops. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the familiar facade. It looked the same tinted windows, same faded logo, but it felt different. I was different. Inside, everything was hushed. News of the board's decision had spread fast, and people were still processing what it meant. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with cautious hope. I stepped into the break room and found David pouring coffee. He turned when he heard me. Morning, he said, studying me like he still wasn't sure I was real. Morning, I replied. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to say congratulations. Thanks, I said, meaning it. There was an awkward pause. Then he nodded once and slipped out. A few minutes later, Natalie appeared, holding a clipboard. Ready for your first official meeting as the boss. I smiled faintly. Not even a little. You'll figure it out, she said, squeezing my arm. By 9, the main conference room was filled. Shannon, Jared, Melissa, Anika, and nearly every department head were gathered around the long table. Some avoided my gaze. Others looked relieved. I took a breath and began. I know the last few weeks have been chaotic, I said. You've all heard rumors, and some of you have been worried about your jobs. I can't promise everything will be easy. But I can promise you this. This company belongs to us now. We're going to rebuild it together. A murmur went around the table. Shannon raised her hand, her expression wary. What happens to Carla? I didn't flinch. She's stepping down, effective immediately. That got their attention. Even Jared looked rattled. And you're really in charge now, he asked. I met his gaze evenly. Yes. He swallowed and looked down at his notepad. After the meeting adjourned, people drifted out in small groups, talking in hushed voices. Some looked relieved. A few looked resentful. But no one laughed at me. Not anymore. By afternoon, I sat alone in what had been Carla's office. The space felt alien, her sterile furniture, her neatly labeled files. I opened a drawer and found a stack of old reports with my name on them. Projects she'd signed her own name to, passing off my work as hers. I closed the drawer, feeling no anger. Just an odd, clean sense of finality. Around 3 o'clock, Natalie appeared in the doorway. How does it feel? She asked. Like I'm waiting for someone to tell me this is a mistake. I admitted. She smiled. You earned this. I don't know what happens next, I said. You figure it out, she said simply. That's what leaders do. That evening, after everyone had gone, I walked the halls alone. I stopped in my old cubicle, the one wedged between the break room and the printer. My battered chair was still there, the same scuff marks on the partition where I'd rested my elbow for 7 years. I reached out and ran my fingers over the desk. This was where I'd started, where I'd learned to swallow my voice, to pretend I didn't care, to let other people decide what I was worth. And this was where it had ended. I turned out the light and closed the door behind me. In the weeks that followed, there were 1,000 problems to solve. Financial audits, client retention meetings, tense conversations with employees who'd backed Ellsworth's bid. Every day felt like a test I wasn't sure I could pass. But every day I showed up. Natalie became my right hand. Melissa took over marketing strategy. Anika led a technical task force to modernize our product suite. One afternoon, Jared knocked on my office door, looking uneasy. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure," I said. He sat across from me, fidgeting with a pen. I owe you an apology." I waited. "For a long time, I thought you were just background noise," he said quietly. "I was wrong." I studied him for a moment. "Thank you for saying that." He looked relieved, like he'd been carrying the words around too long. When he left, I leaned back in my chair. It struck me that for all the ways this company had failed me, it had also shaped me into someone who could stand up and take it back. The months blurred past. We signed new contracts, stabilized cash flow, restructured teams. There were setbacks, more than I could count, but there were also victories. One evening, after a long day, Natalie knocked on the door and dropped a folder on my desk. "Final numbers for Q4, she said, smiling. I flipped through the pages. Profitable. More than we'd projected. I looked up, feeling something shift in my chest. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I said. "We did." Outside, the sun was setting over the parking lot. The building glowed gold in the dusk. I thought about my mother, how she'd worked 2 jobs so I could have choices she never did. I thought about the years I'd spent here, the humiliation, the quiet resentment. It was all part of the same story. A story that ended here, in this office I'd earned, with the company I'd saved. Later that night, as I locked up and walked to my car, I paused to look back at the building one last time. I felt no bitterness, only gratitude. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. And as I drove home, windows down, warm Texas air rushing in, I let myself imagine a future where anything was possible. Because once you've claimed your own worth, there's nothing left anyone can take away.